The time you spend finding files on your computer may seem insignificant and might seem so small that it's negligible, but it's likely not. And a study from the UK found that more than 50%, so over half of professionals, spend at least an hour a day trying to find files on their computer. It's so bad that 20% actually end up recreating files that they had made just because they can't find them. And that's the ultimate example of counterproductivity, having to redo something. So how do you find files fast? In this video, I want to tell you, particularly for a PC or a computer using Windows, how to find files quickly. And it requires two skills. First is consistent file naming practices, and then streamlined file searching practices. So let's first talk about consistent file naming practices. I'm going to open up this folder here, and I want you to look down here where you see behavior index, behavior pages, and you can see that there's multiple versions of the same file here, and that I've used the same name and same structure for those files. You can see even for this, I'm applying that same structure, a descriptive, simple, but memorable name, and then the date in a certain format. And when it comes to naming files, you want it to be descriptive so that it actually describes what's in there so that if you see it, okay, this is what I can expect is going to be in there. You want it to be memorable so that when you go to search for it, you're like, oh yeah, I would have called it that. I would have named it something. You want it to have an element of uniqueness, and we'll talk more about that, but that enables you to, one, find it relative to other files, but also it helps when it comes to the sorting and the placement of the file in the folder. So descriptive, memorable, unique. You want to have the date in there in most cases. And then finally, you want to make sure that it's typo free, because typos might not seem like a big deal, and in most cases they're not, when you think about your overall productivity. But when it comes to file naming, if you, say I were to misspell behavior here, one, it changes the sort, and so it's going to be harder for me to find that file, and I might not find it because I'm looking for it in the context of these other files that have the same name. But also, when I go to search for it, that isn't going to necessarily show up, especially if I spell behavior wrong. And so you want to be careful and be checking that, like, okay, did I misname the file? One shortcut that I'm going to talk about more later, but is how do you rename files quickly? And so if you're selected this file here, if I right click on that, or if you're using a Surface, you can use the right click key. This menu bar pops up, and then I'm going to hit M, and it takes me right to rename. Tab over, add my O back in, and then it jumps back in there. So you want to have consistent, descriptive, memorable, somewhat unique file names with the date. Okay, let's talk about the date for a minute. Why is the date formatted in this way? The date is formatted in that way so that when a folder is sorting those files, which it will do alphanumerically, which means in alphabetical order and by numbers. Numbers come first, and so if there's a number, it will put that ahead. You can see up here how the 19 comes before the A in algorithm. And so numbers come first, and then letters and symbols. So for example, if I were to rename this folder and add an underscore there, you can see that jumps it up to the top there. So symbols are ahead of numbers, and then numbers are followed by letters. So when it comes to the date, here what we're seeing is that if we want to make sure that these are sorted in appropriate order, you want to start at the highest level of date possible, which is the year, and then go down. So for example, if I started with the month and I had March 23rd here, and then I have August 27th, and then say I did something in this year, January 12th. January 12th is going to show up above March 3rd, even though it was created after that. And then it's going to get all mixed together. So if you're doing files that will span years, and you might say, well, that's not likely to be the case. It's not necessarily if, for the broader part of the year, depending on how long you work on a file. But if you're, for example, working on a file in December, then there's a good chance that that might carry over into January. And so it's a good practice to just use this notation. And I use parentheses just to make it simple to see it and to distinguish it from the rest of the file name. So that's a point around dates and what to use around dates. So let's look at a file here. So let's look at this one in this example here. This is a template from Excel of a monthly budget. What we're going to do is just think about the different contexts in which you might be saving the budget and how that might influence the file name. So say, for example, and let's just clean this up real quickly here. Say, for example, that you're the CFO or the accountant or the controller for a company, and you always are creating the monthly budget for the company. Now, I could save it as monthly budget and then April 2020. But this is not going to be super helpful to me from the standpoint of the way that it's sorting those budgets in the folder. So April, is going to show up above January because A comes before J, and so having the April there, again, leading with the month rather than the year is not helpful. So you could just do 2020-04, which that means then it will be sorted in order. So if I'm looking, if I pull up my monthly budget folder, I'm going to see them all sorted in the correct order. So that is one way you could do it. However, one thing that I didn't show you when I was looking at the file names here is when I am going to locate a folder or a file in a folder, if I start typing, so say I want that automation behaviors file right here. So say I'm looking for that, and so I'm just going to come up here, and then if I start typing, so I just did AUTOM, or if I start typing support page documentation, you can see that the selection or the cursor jumps to that file. So one more, Habify steps, goes right up there. So this is a really powerful way to navigate quickly within a folder. But what you can see from what I did, again, for automation behaviors, I start typing AUT, and it takes me down there. So you really only can navigate to a file based on the first few letters of that file or numbers of that file name. And so if I have something to jump back here with monthly budget and every file in this folder starts with monthly budget, I'm not going to be able to use that at all because they're all going to be named in the same way, starting with the same name. And so what you could do here is you could add something like this in the front. This still might be difficult, so you could add the year and the month like that. That would help your sort so that when you're typing in those first few letters, that it will automatically go to that. And so not a perfect scenario there. You might end up just deciding to do this on the back end. That is one context, and you can see how that influences the file name there. So another example, say for example that you're doing this budget for a client, and you, for example, do a bunch of things for this client. So then, if you have a folder for that client, it could be tempting to name this client A monthly budget or something along those lines, and then add the date on the back end here. But again, if that folder has everything for client A in it, then leading with client A is not going to be as helpful. Actually, it's going to be more helpful to lead with monthly budget because that's what's unique in there, and then add your client A over here so that you still, if you're trying to find all files related to this client, or you attach it to a document or attach it to an email, for example, and you need to be like, oh, what is this for? You'll know. So you still want to add that descriptive information in there, but it's better to lead with monthly budget because that's going to be what's unique in the context of the folder and therefore allow you to quickly navigate to it. Now let's say that you do budgets for a bunch of different clients, and so you have a folder with all the budgets that you've created for all your clients. Then actually it's better to lead with client A because that's going to be what's unique there. And so leading with client A allows you to quickly navigate, because then, another folder in there will be, another file in that same folder will be client B, client C, etc. And so you can see how you want to include the appropriate information. So something that will describe it. So if you're working with a client and you're doing a monthly budget, then certainly the client name and monthly budget and the date in that appropriate format. But the way in which you sequence this information in the file name should depend on what other files are in that folder and be as unique as possible so that you can quickly navigate to it. Let me show you another scenario that is pretty common, and that is if you're doing a document, for example, that there's going to be a lot of versions on it. You're going to go through a number of different drafts. There's often a tendency to do, and I'm going to pull up this copy here. So let's say you're creating an outline to do version 1. And then, the next one is version 2, etc., and etc. And you might end up doing something like version 2.1, and, if it gets more involved and complicated. So that is a normal way of doing it. I would recommend not doing it that way, and instead to use dates instead of version numbers, because version numbers aren't tied to specific dates and it's easy to get confused there. And if you're using a different notation than someone else, like if you're using this decimal point and they're just going 3 and then they're like 3.1, it can get confusing quickly. So dates are something that everyone understands. It links it to a particular point in time, so you're well aware of that. And so stick with the date there. And you could say, well, what if things are changing so rapidly over the course of the day that you might have 3 versions in a day? So, one way you can address that is you can add in the time. That will, even add that in. That will satisfy that. The other thing that's often true is you might say, okay, I wrote this and I have a ton of drafts in my folder. And when I come back, I often need to pull the final version. And it's difficult to, sort through this folder and find the final version. So let's say, for example, that this is the final version. It can help to start by adding in final there. And, cap locks makes it distinguish, stand out. But as you can see, in terms of where this is placed in the folder, it's buried in there and it's going to be hard to find. So one thing that you can do is, and we talked a little bit about this before, is add a symbol up front. So just adding that underscore, so it doesn't change the file name. It's, it doesn't confuse anything, but that will throw that right to the top of the folder. And then you can quickly see when you come into this folder, okay, there's my final version, and you can grab it there and it'll always be up there because, you're not going to have other file names that are leading with the underscore. And so if you have a folder where you have a bunch of drafts of something and you want that final version to come up, add in a symbol like an underscore to the beginning of the file name, and that will cause it to jump to the top. Another scenario that's commonly talked about and is relevant when it comes to file names is, what if you're reviewing someone else's work? And so say, for example, and you can see this file name here, this is when I sent the document to the editor. They connected and added their initials to it, and then I added my initials on the end here. So there's 2 different scenarios that I want to talk about. And one is when you review someone else's work and you provide comments on it, but you're not creating kind of a new version of it. What I mean by that is, the difference is, if you sent me a document and I'm going to review it, I might make a bunch of changes to it so it's actually ready for, as a next version. That is different from if you send me a document and I just add a number of comments like the one from Erica here for you to address. So those are 2 different scenarios and you want to treat them differently. And I'll tell you why in a second. So this is where you just have comments in here, but Erica didn't make any changes to it. She just was sending it back to me. If that's the case, you want to maintain the file name. So keep that same file name that the person who sent it to you has, and just add in your initials. You don't even, if this was the name that they chose to apply to the document. So, but even if you had a date in there, don't change the date, because that helps them know, okay, this was the document that I created on this date, and they're adding their edits to it. Now, in the second scenario where I actually, type things in here and make changes and aren't tracking my changes, or even if I am, but I'm creating a new version, that's when I actually want to update the file name. And so if this was one of these versions, then I would actually want to come in here and update the date. It'd be 14 if I'm doing it there. So those two different scenarios. If you're just adding comments for someone else to review, maintain the file name that they created. If you're actually creating a new version, then update the file name to include the updated date or whatever else needs to happen there. But try to keep the file name the same throughout a file's history so that it stays together in the folder. When you search, all of them show up. So that is some best practices around file names. Again, if you have to change a file name, you right click. Because the M is underlined here, if I quickly hit M, I can change that. So you can do that anytime, do that quickly, even as you're just going through and searching for them. Get in the habit of updating those and having good practices around that. The next point around how do you search quickly? Well, first is you should have a Windows key in the bottom left of your keyboard. If not there, then look somewhere else. It has the Windows logo. This is the key to searching quickly. So when I press that Windows key, you can see that this pops up in the top left, and the cursor is flashing down here where it says type here to search. This is the fastest way to find a file or folder because it's immediately accessible regardless of what you're doing on your computer, how many windows you have open, anything else. So you want to start by hitting that Windows key. And then if, for example, I'm trying to find this teaching your teams to think, if I just go teach, you can see already right there, and that's because I just modified this document, so it's going to be close to the top here, but that shows up, and I can just keep think. And you can see that this is what's interesting here is that, that was originally pulling from the web. And so up along the top, you can see the different types of things that it's searching for: apps, documents, web, and there's a list of other things that it's searching for here. You can even search your email. If you were to say, okay, I know this is a document that I'm looking for here, then I can type in down here documents, and then it's going to restrict those search results to documents. Similarly, if I am looking for a folder, I can search for that folder, and then it will only show me folders. And so that's a good way to narrow your search quickly. They're going to look for web results. If they can't find a file name quickly, they're going to start looking to web results in your search results. And so if you want to exclude that, then try typing that in as well. Now let's say that you're like, okay, I know, so you type in this and you see this folder appear and you're like, I know that is related to the file and I think probably in the same location, but I don't think that's the actual right file. Then what you want to do, so you can see over here, it gives you a few options. You can open that, but what you can do here is you can open the file location. And so that's a good way. So then it pulls up that folder, and that's a good way to then be like, okay, I'm going to now see what files are located near there and around there. So if you find a file that's related to it, you think it's probably located in the same spot, but it's not the same, go ahead and again, open that file location. And I can also here just right click on that and then open file location there. So that's another way to do that. So that is how you can search here. This is where you want to start every time you're searching for a file. You want to start there unless you're already in the application in which you're trying to find the file. And then of course you can use control. So say for example, I'm in Word already. So if I'm already in Word and I'm looking for another Word document, if I hit Control O, the nice thing here is that it's going to be showing me my recent files here. And so that's obviously a faster way if I know that I've been using it recently. So if you're in the application, start with Control Open, Control O to open it and look at your recent files there. If you're not, use the Windows search key. And even, honestly, even using the Windows search key, especially if you have can be faster than opening it within the application if you have a really good sense of what that file name is. The other way to find files quickly, and it's related to opening within the application, is say if I know it's a document here, if I right-click on the Start menu icon, you can see that it shows me my recent files here. And so that is another way to get to your recent files quickly. The other thing is if I'm using and opening and closing a file a lot, I can pin that. And you can see now it isolates that up there, it's pinned. And so regardless of whether I've opened it recently, even if that's going to be there. And so I can always come back and navigate that to it. So that is another way to find files quickly. The next thing I want to show you is kind of the third or fourth step that I would take to find a file. And so if I hit the Windows key, hold that down and press E, that's going to open what's called the File Explorer. And this is where, all the files are on your computer. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is that it has frequent folders here and then recent files. So again, if you're looking for a recent file, just hitting that Windows and E, you'll find those quickly and you can navigate to them directly. And the other thing is that you have this quick access section over here on the left. And like from the Start menu icon, you can pin folders here so that you can quickly navigate back to them. If you don't pin it, then it's just going to show the most recently commonly used ones. And it kind of looks for which folders are you using a lot and have been using recently, and then it will populate it that way. But if you want to be proactive about it, you can actually pin those. So let's say then that you are in a directory. So I will just go to this one, in a directory or a file name. And I want to search for a file here. The way that I want to do that is so the search box is over here on the right, but say I'm right here. If I hit Control E, that takes me right to the search key and I can start typing that directly there and then hit, backspace or enter. If say, for example, I know that there's a folder here and it's social media ads, I can hit Control L and then you can see that it brings up that folder there. So that's a way, if I know a folder name that I want to go into and that's already in the folder that I'm in, then hit Control L, take it up there, start typing that, and it will suggest it if you are typing it correctly. Control E again is to search for the file names directly. We've talked about how you can start typing the first few letters of a key in order to get there. So that's a way to quickly navigate within there. If I hit backspace, it's going to take me to the last folder that I was in. And so if you're going back and forth, and then the other thing that you can do is, so right now you can see that the cursor or selection is over on this folder. But if I hit tab as I just did, now it's over here. If I hit shift tab, it takes me back over here, tab. And so that's a way to quickly navigate between the different sections of the File Explorer so that you don't have to be using your mouse there. And so this is a way to quickly navigate. Again, if you hit, say I go into content marketing, I'm like, okay, nope. So I hit backspace, I come back out of that. And then I'm like, actually, I want to go up here to this one. So using these shortcut keys actually will help you navigate much more quickly rather than like dragging your mouse around. Oh, I clicked on that one by accident. And so it's much more precise and it's much quicker. So these are some basic best practices around how to search quickly and how to name your files so that you will not waste an hour a day looking for them. Give them a try. Thanks for watching this video. If you found it helpful, feel free to share it with some others who are spending some time looking through their computers to find files.